Now it's time to start recording the user score. So every time I play Pong against the machine, I have some goals here for me and for my computer adversary. So the points for the computer is rising and mine are not. So this is what we are going to try to write with a user-specific data. So as you can probably see, I'm really bad at Pong. So instead of recording my score to my user, I'm going to record the computer score to my user, just so I can leave it playing and keep refreshing the page, so you will see all the points rising. All right. So in order to do so, I have to go back to my Finder. And it's my desktop, and go to my public page, and here I have a file called pong.js. This is the whole logic for the game, and if I open it with Sublime Text, there you go. Inside this source code I have this part of the code that sets the score for both the computer and the user, and the player number is the variable that holds if the goal was for the user or if it was for the computer. If the player number is 0, it means the user scored a point. If the player number is 1, then it means the computer scored a point. As I said before, I'm going to record the computer goals for me, for my user, because then I can leave the application running and the goals will be rising, and I can show you that on the dashboard. So the very first thing to do is we're going to put an if here, player number equals to 1, which means the computer. I'm going to call a function called add point. So every time the computer scores, I will add a point. All right? And now I can close this and go back to my index.html, and here I'm going to code the add point function. Once again, it's just a big bunch of code, so I'll just paste it and tell you line by line what it does. So I just re-indent it so it looks a little better. There you go. So the very first thing we have to do is retrieve the user which is playing, so I can differentiate one user from another one that might be playing in another session from another browser from another part of the world. So in order to do that, I create a variable called user and use the function parse.user.current. This will identify this user among all the other ones. So, and I'm going to create a new class called score, which will hold the user score and a link to the user that had that score. And at some point I will have to find that score for that specific user, so I can keep incrementing that value. In order to find anything, I have to instantiate a parse query, which means I can query objects inside that class. So for this query, I'm going to query inside the score object, so that if you look on the line above, is basically my score class. And once again, as the scores are user related, I have to make this relation between the scores and the user. In order to do that, I get my query, which is running on the score class, and tell that that query equals to player and my user. So for that specific class, I'll have a property called player, which will hold my user, not my username, but my user ID. And then when I find something, it will always relate to that user. And then I can make a query find. If I don't pass any parameters to the find, it will bring all the results that match the query I just wrote. And once again, this is a success and error block based code. So if I'm able to run the query successfully, I will get into the success block. If something goes wrong, I have an error block. Running the query successfully does not mean bringing results back. I can have a query running successfully and bringing me no results at all, because there are no objects that match those parameters that I've queried for. So this is much more in case something goes wrong and you cannot execute your query than actually not having a result printed out as a response. So if I was able to run my query and I have a success block, then the very first thing I have to do is find out if that player already has a score or not. So inside my results object, I will have a length, and if that length is 0, it means no objects were brought back. And if no objects were brought back, of course the user does not have any score for that specific user. So I'm going to create a new score and set the player as my user. And since this is running every time we make a goal, so there is no need to set it as 0, as when the user has 0 points, he doesn't have to have any score. So I'm just setting it to 1. So the very first time I make a goal, I will create a object with my player and 1. This is for the first time. And once again, I'm trying to save it, which brings us back to the success and error blocks. If I was able to save it, I will just print it, the ID of that object. If I wasn't, then I'll get the error message. But this is if the user does not have a score yet. What if he does? Well, then I have to query for that old score related by the user that was brought to me by my query, and increment that value that started as 1 for the first goal he ever did, and now it's just a matter of incrementing that value every time the user makes a new goal. So I'm going to search for my old score, since every user has only one score, is the position 0 of my results array. And then I can use the increment function to increment that score. This is the property I want to increment. Remember, I have a class scores, it's a class score which has a score property into it. And once it's done, I try to save it again. Alright, so I'll just save it. And if I go back to our console, we can push all that code back. Then I can go back to Google Chrome, reload my Pong game. I can log in with Facebook again. It was already authorized. And then I can start to play. Every time the computer makes a goal, let's let him do it. it created my first object, gave me the app ID, and now it's finding the object and updating. If I go back to my parse dashboard and refresh it, I'll have my score class, which has my score and a link to my user. And if I keep on refreshing this, you can see the score is rising as the computer makes new goals on the other screen. This goes all the way up to 9, if I'm not wrong. It's when the game finishes. Yeah, I think it's finished now. Yeah, the computer is the winner, but I got the points. And just out of curiosity, if you click on the player here, it will bring us to the user class until it's my user.